So I thought that I would talk next about how crazy the last weekend was. Forget about the last 6 weeks. The last weekend, holy crap. God, I swear a lot. Gotta sort that out. Anyway, so I decided to compete in the Swedish Magic Championships probably at the beginning of this year when it was announced. And the reason I think you should compete in any competitions is it's not only to win, even though I did win. It's more to have a goal, to have something to aim towards. Because when you are a creative artist, if you don't have a show to perform, if you don't have something to aim towards, you will constantly create, but create with no goal, and you won't achieve better for yourself. So I highly recommend giving yourself a goal like a competition or a set performance date or something so that you can aim towards to improve yourself and improve your skill, which in my case, it is magic. So yeah, I decided to compete in the Swedish Magic Championships. And I remember saying to my boyfriend at the time, well, if I'm competing, I may as well compete in all three. How crazy was that idea? You can only imagine how crazy it was. Insane. It was absolutely insane. I mean, it seems logical, right? Because you're already competing in one thing, so it seems logical. Oh, well, if I'm competing in one, I may as well just compete in them all because that makes sense. No, it really does not make sense. It is insane competing in 3 competitions in just one weekend, which is across 2 days. Mental. And I'll explain why. So in magic, there are different categories for people here who aren't magicians. And there are different categories of magic. For example, there is mentalism, I can see into the future. So that's a category in magic. There is also close-up magic, which is the very intimate magic that you might see when you're at a wedding or an event where magicians are actually doing magic in your hands. And that is what we call close-up magic. And close-up magic is very close to my heart because 5 years ago, I decided to start doing close-up magic, and I entered and won the British Ring Championships in close-up magic. So close-up has been very close to my heart the last while. I've been to the Magic Castle and performed in the close-up gallery. I've performed close-up in the 654 Club in Chicago. So yeah, I was 100% going to compete in the close-up competition in Sweden. And I plan to combine some of the work that I've done at the Magic Castle and Chicago Magic Lounge to make that act up. So that was probably the most comfortable and confident kind of area of the competition that weekend that I felt that I was in. But then, as I say, I decided, well, I might as well compete in all 3. So not only did I compete in close-up, but I decided to compete in kids magic, or in Sweden we call it barntrolleri. And I also decided to compete in stage magic. Don't ask me what that's called. It's way too late at night for me to remember the Swedish for that. I really can't remember it. Anyway, so barntrolleri or kids magic is obviously a category of magic that is specifically designed for children. And in that kind of magic, you would most likely have to show interacting with children and families the way you would. And also, I don't know what I'm saying. And I've done kids magic for 15 years. That's great. Anyway, yes, so there was kids magic and then there was stage magic. And stage magic I have probably the least experience in out of the 3. But I decided to challenge myself. And what better way to challenge yourself than by creating a completely new act? And that's exactly what I did. And I've always wanted to perform a manipulation act. But weirdly, I always imagined it being with cards or billiard balls, something really elegant and beautiful. If you don't know what a billiard ball act is, look it up on YouTube. Or a card manipulation act, look that up on YouTube. There's plenty. But for some reason, I decided not to do with billiard balls, not to do it with cards, but to do it with umbrellas. And I thought, wow, parasols, this will look fantastic. Little did I know, working with parasols has been an absolute nightmare. Who decides to work with parasols? Me, clearly. But oh my God, it has been an absolute nightmare. But it has been fun as well. And I have learned so much. And I understand that when I complete this act, even though I've already won the Grand Prix with this act, but when I complete this act, I will be a complete expert in parasol magic. But in the meantime, learning to work with parasols is driving me insane. When I arrived on the Saturday, the very first competition I had to perform was the close-up competition in the morning. Then in the afternoon, it was the stage competition. There was probably like an hour, maybe 2 hours in between. And then the next day was the kids' magic. It's very late. The kids' magic competition. So 3 competitions in quite close proximity to one another. And it's really difficult to kind of warp your head around that, because performing in these 3 different environments requires a different mindset and a lot of control. And what doesn't help is when one of the acts, particularly an act that you're not comfortable with, like the brand new act that I was completing, just fell to pieces. It fell apart. And I will explain why. Because obviously I'm building a new act, and as I said, parasols are driving me insane. I got an amazing friend of mine, Stacey Teague, I love you loads, to work with me on a costume, because for the last 6 weeks I've been playing around with parasols and kind of finding out what I need to make the parasol magic happen, make the parasols appear. And I decided, well, I'm going to make the dress myself, because if I make the dress myself, then a designer or a costumier will know then what I need and how it can work. But I couldn't get the dress to work. I couldn't get the costume to work. And I absolutely broke down. And this was while I was in the course in Sigtuna, Sweden, because I just couldn't get it to work. It wasn't right. So I knew that when I came back home, I had to get a professional on board. So I contacted my friend Stacey, who has worked on Cirque du Soleil, Game of Thrones. She is an absolute superstar. And she's learning very fast to work with me, a magician, which isn't easy when I don't really know what I need or want. And I basically called her and says, look, we have 1 week. We have 1 week for you to make me a costume for the Swedish Magic Championships. And my God, she worked hard. I was working hard, obviously, trying to make all the props work, make the umbrellas, the flowers that I made appear, make everything work. But she was working so hard, driving back and forth. We went and bought material. I spent a fortune on material. She made an outfit out of muslin that was absolutely amazing. Everything seemed to work. And then we had literally 2 days before I competed. Oh, and also while we were doing all that, I was in rehearsals for the Peter Corey production, which you've heard about in another video. So I was basically rehearsing every day, 10 to 6. And then as soon as I got home from rehearsals, I was working on the act, building stuff from 7 to 3:30 in the morning. And she was obviously working on the costume. So she had 2 days to actually build the costume from scratch. And when the Saturday came that I flew on the Friday actually. When I flew, Stacey literally finished the costume a half an hour before I got the bus to Dublin to fly to Sweden. So I literally got the costume half an hour before leaving. And God love her, she made it. It was fantastic. But when I arrived in Sweden, it just didn't work. It fell apart. And by the time I arrived in Sweden, by the way, this was 1:30 at night and the competition was at 10:30 in the morning. So at 1:30, I kind of just fell apart, and I was like, I can't compete. I can't do this. And I didn't know how to solve it. Thankfully, my boyfriend, my amazing boyfriend, was there, and he made me a cup of tea, and he put a timer on. And I've never done this before, and I think this is a really good idea. Like, if you're ever stuck or having a problem, sometimes if you solve a problem in a stressed out way, you're not going to solve it in the best way. So he made me a cup of tea, soda tea, which is amazing, and you can't get it anywhere else but in Sweden, and it's beautiful. After that, I sat for 5 minutes, and he put on a timer actually for a full 5 minutes for me to sit and not do anything, just to look at the trousers and figure out what the problem was and why it wasn't working. And I kid you not, after I had the cup of tea, crying, like looking all emotional, I did figure it out, and I figured out that the material was wrong. There was different things that I could do, and I knew how I could attempt to fix it, and I did. It may have taken me literally all night, but I fixed the costume as best I could, and the umbrellas came out, and it was working. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. So what I realized was, and by the time I fixed it, it was 5:30 in the morning. So I had to basically put that aside, because the first competition I was taking part in was the close-up competition, OMG. And so I packed everything away and realized I have a couple of hours before the stage, so I can get back to this later on. And I got myself ready for the close-up competition. And wow, because I didn't sleep the whole night. And sometimes you have to do that, but I did not sleep. So I was so up to high dough. I downed a can of Red Bull before going on stage, and I just winged the close-up competition. Thankfully, I had done the stuff before, and I had practiced also. I've been practicing these acts all week as well before I went to Sweden. So I basically stormed through the close-up. By the way, I actually competed in the parlor, because my act was kind of in between close-up and stage. And that's what we call an act that's between close-up and stage. We call it parlor magic, because there used to be parlors that magicians performed in, and this was that kind of magic. So I completed that first competition, and I immediately went backstage in the theatre where the stage magic competition was taking part, and I began to assemble the costume, and then I began to assemble my tables. And so when I finally worked out the costume problems, then I had an issue with my table, because another amazing friend of mine, John Henry, had 3D printed and designed me a table that could completely break down. And it is an amazing table, but I hadn't seen it in like months. And to put that table together was like trying to assemble the hardest jigsaw puzzle in the world. And it took me just forever to do. So finally, when I got it assembled, I realized that there was a part in the table that I forgot to give him that wasn't designed to fit in the new table. So again, I was at the stage where I was like, well, can I compete in this? Oh my God. So, but yes, after what I went through with the costume, I was like, no, I was determined at that stage. I got some super glue, we glued the part on, and that was working fine. And then I forgot the magic. So in order to compete in this competition, I needed a 6-minute act. So the umbrella act was only like, the parasol act was only about 3 minutes. And I decided, I'll patch on the act that I did on Sweden's Talang, which I'll put a link down below with. Only problem is, I forgot one of the tricks. I forgot how to do one of the tricks. And this is another thing that I've learned. So what you should do with complex magic magicians out there is you should record them for yourself, not for other people, but you should record how you do them from the front and from behind, so that if you haven't performed a piece in a while and you forget how to perform it, you can look at these videos and go, that's how I do that. Because that was the problem that I had. I was so stressed out. I hadn't slept all night, and I literally couldn't figure out one of the tricks that I did in this piece. And literally, this was up until probably 20 minutes before I went on stage. I just didn't know how to perform this part of the routine, and it was crazy. It was insane. So I had the stress of the costume, I had the stress of the table, I had the stress of not knowing one of the tricks. I just didn't think the stage act was going to come together. And I realized that, well, if the magic is not going to work, I need to pay attention to the things that I know I can do and I can make work. And I remembered my boyfriend said to me as well that if it goes to shit, and I'm sorry, I have to say this here because that is the word he used. So if it goes to shit, it's funny. This is magic. Yes, we take it very seriously and we love what we do, but we also have to have fun. That's why we're creating. That's why we're enjoying what we do. And if it goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. Like, I'm very black and white, or I used to be like that. I used to always think, if something goes wrong, it's a disaster. And I used to cry for days. And what I realized is that you can't really do that because, everything's totally progressing and moving and moving in the forward direction. And you can't be so hard on yourself. So I realized in that moment, like, this is not going to be fun if I take on this attitude that everything's going to fall to pieces. So I have to give myself the fun. I have to act my way through the piece, feel my way through the piece. It has to be real for me and real for the audience. And if I manage to do those three things, hopefully that's enough to carry me through if anything goes wrong. And my word, I couldn't have given myself any better advice because I made my way through the act. There was a couple of little glitches that happened, but I'll never forget that when one of the glitches happened and I just whipped one of the umbrellas out and into play and I just smiled. And I remember that feeling because I was like, there's nothing I can do to cover this up. My God, I'm going to enjoy this moment because I finally got that fucking umbrella out, and I am going to enjoy this moment because I made it happen, even though I knew it was difficult and I knew it didn't look good, but my God, I'm going to perform this like it was meant to be. And I just think in that moment I really learnt that that's what being a magician is. It's solving problems in the moment and being present in your performance and giving the audience something real. And I did it. And I knew that it wasn't perfect. And so much so that when I came off stage, I was so shocked because the reaction that I got and I heard from certain things was just so much better than I thought it could ever have been. And I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed my performance. I felt it. And but I wasn't expecting to receive anything. I didn't even know when the award ceremony was. I was so caught up in everything going wrong that I just wanted to pack up my stuff and go home. And that's what I did. So I packed up, and then the organizer of the convention ran in and said, "Do you not know the award ceremony's happening?" And I'm like, "Oh, but okay." And obviously I went out. And when I sat down, I couldn't have been more surprised because I was brought up not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I won first prize in parlor magic for my parlor magic act. And I won first prize in general magic. And then lo and behold, at the very end, they held up a golden certificate and a golden trophy and named me the Grand Prix winner of stage magic. And I just was absolutely gobsmacked. But you know what? I also know that I put so much work into that act. Yes, it wasn't perfect, but my God, was it deserving of that for the amount of work I've done? Hell yes. And I am so grateful that people could see that in the work and the act that I did because I worked so hard on that. And yeah, so I suppose I put this video together so you could hear an honest version of what I went through on one of the craziest weekends of my life. Would I recommend competing in 3 competitions in one weekend? No. In fact, on that note, with the barn trollery the next day or the children's magic, I mean, that is probably the act that I am most comfortable with, but I didn't get anything because I ran over time. I was disqualified. And part of the reason why I ran over time was because by that stage, my brain was like dead. And trying to perform in a different language when your brain's dead, it just doesn't work. I couldn't even remember if I'd said what I'd said at certain points during the act. So, yeah, I was done by that stage after the day before the craziness. So yeah, would I recommend competing in the 3 competitions? Would I do it again? No. Am I glad I did it? Yes, because I discovered so much about myself, how far I could push myself, and also it was a good challenge to do. But I'm not going to go and run into doing that again in a hurry, alongside rehearsing a show, alongside going to America, alongside doing a magic course. Oh my God, the last 6 weeks have just been insane. So yes, but yeah, definitely aim towards something for your magic to become better, because you just never know what's about to happen or who's going to see your magic, and that's what it's all about.